Where the Vale of Glamorgan comes down to meet Cardiff Bay, you'll find the small coastal town of Penarth. With the sea on one side and the South Wales valleys on the other, Penarth was ideally placed to become a major port. Indeed, much of its history it owes to the sea. To have a well-known landmark is one thing, to have a well-known sea mark is another, and that's the distinction of St Augustine's Church in Penarth. It's marked on Admiralty charts and has been recognised by generations of sailors as a welcome sign that they were coming home. Penarth was a busy port with Welsh coal shipped from these docks to many parts of the world. When the mines closed, the docks lay derelict for years, but in the 1980s were redeveloped into a marina, a sign of the prosperity which returned to the town with the growth of the new leisure industries. Just over there is the island of Flat Home, which earned its place in history in 1897 when a 21-year-old Italian called Guglielmo Marconi made the first ever radio transmission across water from the mainland to the island. The fact that he did it at all is really quite remarkable, not least because when he arrived in England, the customs smashed his radio equipment, thinking he was an Italian spy, and up to no good. Penarth today is one of South Wales' most popular resorts, the Victorian pier being given a new lease of life with some major restoration. When the paddle steamer Waverley comes across the bay on its regular summer trips, it seems almost as if nothing much has changed since its 19th century heyday. So, let's now join the people of Penarth with the Antiques Roadshow experts.
Now, this is a truly remarkable service because when you look at it, you would be forgiven for supposing it was made of very fine porcelain and from one of the grand factories. And in fact, as you know, it's made of creamware, pottery, and it comes from a sort of second-rank factory. And we can see this from the way it's marked. It comes from Davenport. Yes. The shapes are the classic ones of about 1820, 1825. You find them in porcelain and in the best creamwares. What is unusual in a creamware service is to find a solid brown colour. And it's harder to apply it to pottery than it is to porcelain. And that is why, in fact, it has a rather gritty effect. I think it hasn't sunk into the ground as well as it would on porcelain. And so you've got most of the service?
Yes, most of it.
You've got a centre, this is a centre dish.
Yes.
And you've got?
3 of those.
3 of those. There would have been 4, therefore.
Yes. 3 of those.
There would have been 4 and they would have had baskets on them.
Yes.
They are stands
yes.
for baskets.
And 11 of those.
And 11 of those. And there are no other shaped dishes?
I don't think so, no.
The 3 sauce tureens, covers and stands like this alone are worth £1,500.
Good gracious me.
Well, they're the most expensive bits,
yes.
but everybody likes to have them. That is probably worth £250. If you put these in at £100 each, you're getting up to
yes.
3,000. £3,500 to £4,000 is what the service seems to be worth.
Good gracious me.
These belong to both of you then?
Yes, that's right.
Well, they're lovely things, actually. But of course one should say, I think that if they were modern ivories, the situation would be quite different, wouldn't it?
Oh, yes.
Are you taught at school about protection of elephants and ivory and so forth?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. What do they say at school? In my day, when I went to school, and we were never taught this sort of thing.
Well, you shouldn't take modern ivory because it's unfair on the elephants. They are endangered species.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
They shouldn't just be killed for some little ornament to put on your mantelpiece or dressing table or something like that.
Absolutely, yeah. Of course, elephants are protected. In the days when that was carved, of course, that wasn't the case, because that was carved about 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So there were no protection laws then. Well, this is much the nicer of the two, so we'll put that to one side. But and this chap, he's a woodcutter, isn't he?
Yes.
He's actually having not a tea break, he's having a sake break. He's going to have a quick swig of sake here. His cup's missing, actually.
Yeah.
But this thing here is a gourd. The sake would have, well, the rice wine would have been kept in the gourd. But here he's resting on this, the sticks, these just cut, which are brilliantly done, aren't they? Every single branch, all trimmed. He certainly deserves a sake break, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Anyway, we turned it upside down, and we have, of course, a little red lacquer seal, which indicates that it probably made in the Tokyo area, and it was a very, very fine quality. It's certainly worth several hundreds of pounds. And I think something of the order of, not quite 1,000, maybe sort of 600 to 900, 600 to 800 pounds, say. What do you think of that?
Wow.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I worked for a company which manufactured miners' lamps, and they commissioned this drawing to use as a calendar, 1938, I think. And when the company went defunct, and the buildings were being pulled down and so forth, the secretary said, you know, we'd like to have that as a keepsake.
There can be very few artists whose names have gone into the common usage in the English language. And William Heath Robinson, I think, must be the leading name of that type. He was born in 1872 and trained as a perfectly conventional artist. And in fact, as a young man, illustrated numerous children's books and so on. And really, he came to prominence in the First War, producing these very eccentric cartoons, lampooning all the devices made by the ministries and so on. And we have this wonderful, mad scene of a man picking out lumps of coal with his first miner's safety lamp in 1066. He died towards the end of the Second World War, so this is quite a late work. I think it is a particularly nice subject. It's also in a nice condition, and as you know, the history behind it and everything, and I would imagine that at auction it would make between £800 and £1,200, and certainly ought to insure it for perhaps as much as £1,500.
Handsome English furniture, just pre-Regency, and this I think is the suite.
Yeah.
Do you use
it?
it?
Isn't it? No, not really. No.
I think that's a lovely idea. The idea of cutting this beautiful piece of mahogany, originally by the maker, to have that little writing compartment, I think is so sweet.
Yes.
And of course, it's typical of one maker, and only one maker. And I'm sure you've seen, and you know who it's by.
Gillow.
Here we are, the Gillow family.
Yes.
That stamp varies over a period of years. I mean, they later became Waring and Gillow.
Yes, I know that.
The early part of this century. The firm was started by Robert Gillow in, I think, the 1720s.
Yeah.
This stamp, with just Gillow, is around the period of this table, from about 1790 to 1810.
Oh.
And at one stage they had Gillow Lancaster,
yes.
and then Gillows with an S, which is what we call them.
Yes, I've read that.
But his surname is actually Gillow.
Yeah.
But even without that stamp, just looking at this, it's a typical Gillow design. Is this an old family piece?
Well, it has been in my family for a long time, but not my immediate family.
Do you have any idea what it's worth?
No idea.
Sort of thing.
All I know is I like it.
What would you guess it's worth today?
Oh gosh, I've no idea. No idea at all. No.
Well, I'd certainly expect it to make between £3,000 and £3,500 at auction.
Oh, good gracious. Oh, I didn't think it'd be worth as much as that. Oh.
This one's for your... That's there's glass in there.
Yes, that's fine. That can go together.
They came into service, I think, in 1831 and didn't go out of service until early this century. So within that period, and you quite often find in the accounts of various boroughs, certainly one of the Birmingham Borough Police, there was an instruction that mounted constables carrying these should not hack at the hedges with them because it cost them a halfpenny for the blade to be resharpened. And they've always been eminently saleable as gifts for retiring police officers. Without the scabbard, between £75 and £100. With the scabbard, add another 75 to it.
Now, Ueni is obviously a very important pottery in this area, isn't it? I mean, Ueni became a pottery that flourished greatly in the late Victorian period when it suddenly became associated with both the local tradition and the making of art wares. And this has become an art pot by the time it was made, which was probably in the 1880s. This is a very splendid piece, I say, in a very traditional form. All this irregularity of colour is what you expect. There is some damage on it,
yes,
the handles have been off. Now, of course, the market for Ueni is exactly here. You know, if I took this to London, it wouldn't fetch nearly so much. But what it wants to do is to go into a specialist Welsh pottery sale here, and a local collector might pay, I would think £150, something like that, possibly even more. Obviously, the damage affects it. if this was perfect, it would probably be £300.
Most people looking at a dish like this would think, oh, that's a collection plate out of a church. In fact, what this is a rosewater dish. Now, rosewater came about in medieval times for the very simple reason that nobody washed. You will have heard that Queen Elizabeth I used to have a bath twice a year, whether she needed it or not. So that was a good start. But the story of this dish goes back way before Queen Elizabeth, where people would go to a noble's house for a grand dinner. They would come in from outside, dressed in all their riding clothes. So you would be greeted by a man standing in the doorway with a big dish full of wonderfully scented water, full of rose water or lavender water. And you would wash your beastly, grubby, dirty old hands in the water, and you'd dry yourself on a towel hanging over his shoulder. Then, best bit happened, somebody got hold of a bottle full of nice smelly water, rose water or lavender water, went all over you. Because you smelt so ghastly that if they had lots of you all sitting down in one room together, nobody could breathe. But I think this dish dates back to the 17th century.
17th,
yes.
Then how much would it be worth?
Well, that's very difficult because there are collectors for old brass, and I think really they are worth quite a lot of money. I can see it making somewhere around about sort of £600, £800 in auction, something like that. Your lower lip is trembling.
Anything else? 800.
This plate looks really fresh and new. Absolutely clean, isn't it? But how long have you had it?
About 25 years.
Do you know anything about it before that?
No, I know nothing about it except that I was told it was very old. It was given to me by my mother's best friend, and she'd had it given to her by an old lady.
Well, and it is a very good example of Bristol Delft.
Bristol, right.
It was made probably in about 1760, between 1750 and 1760. And Bristol, easy to recognise because they use this funny sagey green colour.
Yeah.
And also, they appear to have used a sort of felt pen.
Yes, it's got a massive...
It has this funny felt pen effect, doesn't it? The way these strokes are applied. They made blue and white Delft, and they made coloured Delft. And the coloured Delft is very sought after. It's a good size, because you get plate size, this is a really generous size. I haven't got my tape measure here, but must be getting on for 13 inches. I think you should insure it for £800.
Of course, Eric Gill has great relevance as far as the BBC is concerned. He was the sculptor who did all those wonderful sculptings outside the BBC Broadcasting House, as you probably know. Yes, yes. He caused great trouble because he refused to wear trousers. He used to think it was an abomination to wear trousers. And in central London, of course, he had to be shrouded behind the scaffolding while he erected these wonderful sculptures. Anyway, that's by the way. You have got a wonderful collection of letters from Eric Gill and a few of his engravings here, and obviously something to do with the Goupil Gallery, who is mentioned time and time again. Mrs. Marchant of the Goupil Gallery.
The Goupil Gallery was moved from Paris by my grandfather, the husband of Mrs. Marchant. He died early in this century, but my grandmother, Mrs. Marchant, took over the running of the gallery and had all these correspondence with Eric Gill on really main mundane business matters, many of them.
This Mrs. Marchant, there was a biography out recently by Fiona McCarthy. Didn't he have an affair with your grandmother?
Well, it's interesting you mention that. We bought this book for my mother, who has taken a great interest in the affairs of the gallery since she's almost the only living relative. And we thought she'd enjoy this book, knowing her contact with Eric Gill. When we looked up the references to the family name, we discovered that Eric Gill had claimed to have had a fairly close liaison with my grandmother, which was a family surprise.
Yeah, I went ask you, yes. Well, anybody who goes around without trousers, I mean, well, what could you say?
Well,
anyway,
took them off more than once.
I don't think he ever wore them. No, literally, honestly. These little engravings here, these are absolutely wonderful. CM from EG. So these are actually to your grandmother here. Certainly that one is anyway. It's such a pity about this one here. This is signed by Eric Gill here with monogram, but it's had a rather nasty thing put across it like that. Do you have any other?
We've, not Eric Gill, but these are a collection of various letters from John Nash, another well-known artist who was again associated very much with the Goupil.
Well, John Nash, of course, I suppose he's most famous, or at least I know him, because he's a very long letters too, much less like the Gill letters. Love John at the bottom. He didn't have an affair with her.
Not as far as I'm aware. I haven't seen any biographies yet.
He was a great war artist. He was one of the official war artists again. But this is absolutely fascinating. Sort of a whole history of an art gallery and sort of letters and bits and pieces. These lovely engravings here, which are actually signed by Gill, would be worth in the region of 100. This one here, because it's a presentation copy, would be worth about 140, 150. This one, sadly, is an example. I think one could possibly get the stain out, but it would still take away from that wonderful engraving. I'm afraid would only probably be worth about 40 or 50 pounds. An ordinary Eric Gill letter, I suppose they don't fetch an awful lot of money, but I mean, 40 pounds. But there again, you do have rather a lot of them. You've got sort of, you flood the market, quite frankly, with 30 or 40 letters. Similarly with John Nash. He's not going to be expensive as Eric Gill, but he's still going to be worth about 20, 30 pounds each. It's a wonderful collection, and a fascinating collection.
We keep them out of interest, not out of value. But,
I'm delighted to hear it, because you can dip back in all this sort of material and see what life was like in the gallery of your grandmother.
Well, I know nothing about the vase, except that it's in the family for many years. And we've always admired it and had great pleasure from it. And now we want to know the value of it.
Well, the thing that attracts me about this is it belongs to a peculiar family of colours, Chinese colours.
Yeah.
A lot of the colours that we see here are from the Famille Verte palette, especially this green here. And of course we have the classic Famille Rose peony there. And because it's on a black background, it gets the rather fancy name Famille Noire, the black family of enamels. Famille Noire was very, very popular in China and in Europe at the end of the 19th century, and this is how old this particular piece is. It's got these lovely Buddhistic lions gambolling through an undergrowth of what appear to be snowballs, flowers in fact, and peonies. And here you have another Buddhistic lion at the bottom there. And then we have this. This is not original to the piece. Did you have this done yourself?
No, it was on there originally, so we know nothing more about it.
Well, originally, at some stage, someone has broken it.
Oh.
This is usually the fate of lids. They get broken at some stage in their lifetimes.
Yes.
And unfortunately, in breaking the lid, they also appear to have broken rather badly the rim.
Yes.
But judging by the colour of the repair up there, I'd have thought that was done quite a long time ago.
Oh, very
Not long after it was made.
No.
It has quite a severe effect on the value of the piece.
Does it? Yes.
I might just point out that someone has rather cleverly taken what was a stand from another vase.
Yes.
That is actually a stand. And they've discovered that the rim fits perfectly on there. So they've done that to it.
Yeah.
And I suspect that that was possibly the lid from the missing vase that we don't know what it looks like. It's a European piece of pseudo-ormolu, which just sort of neatly fits in there, and it keeps the jar as a potpourri.
Yeah.
You could pick up something like this for maybe somewhere in the region of £500 or £600.
Ah, right. 600 pounds, yeah.
Do you keep fragrant rose petals into anything like that?
No, I don't, but I will now.
You will? Oh, jolly good.
The brooch is Russian. It has been in my family for a long time. I had it valued in Poland, and I was told that it may be a Fabergé brooch, but they were not sure about that.
And what about the other pieces?
A set of jewelry I was given by my husband for our third wedding anniversary, and it was bought in a shop in Warwick.
Right.
That's the box.
That's the difference, actually. I mean, immediately one looks at a piece like that, it stands out as Russian. These most certainly are not Russian, these are English.
Yes.
The nice thing about them is that you've got very pretty opals put together there, and they've set off very well with the rubies and the diamonds in the centre. Very pretty little suite and a nice design with the drop earrings. A set like that today, I would have thought something approaching a couple of £1,000. But the piece that I really like is the Russian piece. I mean, when you look at it, it's so simple. There's nothing there at all. But it shrieks of quality. You've got this lovely beaded edge, a nice little cabochon sapphire in the centre, beautiful enamelling, and on that pin there's a little K and a crown, and that's the abbreviated version of Fabergé's mark.
Oh, I see.
He only put that on these very small pieces. The other bigger pieces were signed in full. And again, when I looked at the end of the pin here, you can see the Russian gold standard, the 56 standard for Russian gold. So it's a lovely piece, and I do envy you that. I mean, although I like the opals, this to me is a collector's piece. And today, I suppose, if that came up, you'd certainly get something in the region about £1,000, possibly up to £1,500 for it. It's a lovely piece, and thanks for bringing it in.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well, Clive, we asked you to bring along one of your favourite things, and you brought this, which is very interesting, but what on earth is it?
Well, this is a Bambara headpiece, which is from the Bambara tribe in West Africa, Nigeria, and is used by the young farmers of the Bambara tribe at their various ceremonies twice a year.
And where did you find it? On some safari to Africa?
Not Africa, but San Francisco. I was in a shop and I saw it and I had to buy it. My wife said I couldn't possibly bring it home. I said yes, I could. And we had it on board with us.
And it actually, although it doesn't look particularly fragile, is, because I thought when I first picked it up that it was going to be a very heavy piece. In fact, it almost floats off the floor.
It does. Well, you see, they've got to wear it on their head. They wear it with sort of raffia, a raffia headdress at the bottom here, with loads of dreadlocks around, and they dance around, pretending to be this spirit, which this represents, Chewara, the spirit of the wind. And the idea is that the spirit of the wind helped them with their agriculture in the early days. And twice a year, when they sow their seeds and when they reap, they go around pretending to be this spirit. They're a very spiritual people. They believe that by doing this, they can actually activate the spirits to help their agriculture along.
So it's all mixed up with African mythology and superstition and
Absolutely, that's absolutely right.
And is it particularly old?
Well, I think it is old, actually. African art is derivative, and people always say, oh, yes, it's bound to be modern. But in fact, in this case, if you look at the eye here, there's a little bit of trade cloth showing, a little red piece of trade cloth. Well, trade cloth was used in the 19th century, the Europeans trading with the Africans, bright red cloth, and this was what they used on there. You don't see it in any of the later ones, so that's how I know that it is of a good age.
So how does a pot from the frozen north end up in South Wales?
I don't really know, but I had it off my mother-in-law, from my mother-in-law.
So it's an heirloom. It's been passed down the family.
Yeah.
Well, Pilkingtons, I mean, they started off as a tile-making concern, and they introduced a man from Wedgwood, I think in the 1890s, a man called William Burton, who was a chemist and something of a writer as well on ceramic history. And he was the new driving force at Pilkington. And by the way, Pilkington's pottery, nothing to do with Pilkington's glass. The number of times that people talk about the connection between the St. Helens firm, as far as I'm aware, there's no great connection. But either way, William Burton arrived and he transformed the products that they were making there and started the art pottery, employed a whole list of very, very talented artists. But I have to say, of all the artists, one of my firm favourites is Richard Joyce. And I think it's fair to say this is almost without doubt the work of Richard Joyce. Decorated in lustre technique. I mean, Pilkington's made a whole range of wares, but it's their lustre wares which collectors go for. But let's just look at the fish. Some of them are quite ferocious looking, aren't they?
Yeah.
They all look as though, well, even the little ones looks as though they could possibly be piranha, don't they?
Yeah, quite evil.
I mean, I think this fella down here is particularly vicious looking, this one down here. And what I like is the way that they've actually picked out in this blood red colour the decoration, so that one can date the piece from the mark which is just under the glaze. I would suspect this dates from around about 1920, just after the First World War. And there, in a small panel, is the monogram of Richard Joyce, an unsung hero, really, of ceramic decoration and a master of the technique of lustre decorating. I suppose when it comes to money, I would certainly envisage this at auction attracting a bid in the region of £1,000.
Well, after all the heavy intellectual content of the roadshow, I thought we'd have a bit of light relief. Perennially popular puppies. And what do you think of it?
Well, not very much. My son really thought it was worthwhile.
And you've got it, have you just received it or you've left it?
Well, my brother died and I've inherited it, you see. And he hasn't really bothered very much about it. It was put, you know, in a cupboard and that was it.
I don't know whether you've noticed this, is signed and dated Claude Hunt, 1906. And we can see here, under all this muck, how beautifully these dogs are painted. And another thing that an artist should do if he's a dog painter who wants to give the pictures value is to give them a sort of human quality. And of course Landseer was the great man for that. But these dogs do have a human quality, and of course there's the subject matter. It's the old dog in the manger. He's not going to let anyone, he's not going to let anyone near his bones, but the other one's pinching it from behind, and it's, you can find all of human life in this picture. Now, you may think that because this picture has been mistreated, which I would say it has.
It has, yeah.
that it detracts from the value. But in another way, because it actually hasn't been touched, re-cleaned, it helps the value to a certain extent. Now, the Hunts are very sought after. Not by your family.
No,
but
by
the general public. And a picture like this is worth £6,000 to £7,000.
Good gracious me. Well, I was on the point of throwing it out, but my son said, I think it's of some value. And that's why we're here tonight.
The model is based on the most famous British radio ever made.
Is it?
Did you have it when you were small?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
In 1934 or 35, an architect called Wells Coates designed a round Bakelite radio for Echo. You know, you've heard the radio company called Echo. And it's the most collectible radio of all time now. But what I've never seen before is a money box based on that radio. And I think that's great. And on the back, it's got this wonderful instructions. And it says, when you put 60 pence in, the door opens automatically. And it works. I mean, it's very collectible as a money box. It's also great for a radio enthusiast like me. In collector terms, I would think there's at least £50 there, regardless of what you put in it.
I think what this was a treasure box. It was for keeping money or jewellery in.
Yes.
Something precious.
Can you hear that? Treasure box.
Because what we've got here are all these metal bands.
Yes.
Cast iron, tough things.
Yes.
Wonderful carving.
Yes.
It's extremely old.
Yes. How old?
Well, I would guess somewhere around about 1500.
Let me jot it down. I've got a lousy memory.
Right, 1500. Put it on your list. I also think it's German.
I thought that, yes.
But the best bit of all, for me, excuse me doing this to your box, is the bottom.
Why?
Well, what we often look for in something like this is authenticity. You want it to look ancient. If you're imagining you're trying to date something, everything has to be old.
Yes.
Looking around here, we've got pieces of wood which have broken off. We've got lovely woodworm holes. We've got adze marks where the guy actually carved this with a tool. He wasn't making it on a machine, he was making it by hand.
Yes, yes.
And it quite possibly came from a part of the world where carving was second nature. Everybody carved. All the men. Probably Black Forest or somewhere like that.
Yes. What I like is this man and this woman here holding scrolls, these two.
Yeah, I see them.
They're lovely.
Yeah, Adam and Eve, do you think?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Could be.
It could be.
Could be. Well, how did you come by it? Did you have
I bought it at an auction for 30 shillings.
Did you? You bought it? When was that?
30 years ago.
30 years ago, 30 shillings. Well, I think your 30 pieces of silver have gone up a bit since then. I think we're looking at a box here which, if it went into a sale in Germany, because that is where the market is for things like this,
yes,
would be worth somewhere around about £1,500, £2,000 English.
Would it?
Yes.
Let me jot that down.
£1,500, £2,000.
This is so delightfully understated. The size is nice too. Just a little, 6 foot high, I suppose. But what really catches my eye immediately is the rounded edge to this. This lovely quarter column here, beautifully fluted after an ancient Grecian column.
Yes.
But the way it leads down, rounded here as well, continuing that, they could have easily dropped it into a square carcass. All the way down here. And this lovely OG bracket foot, is called, this lovely squiggly serpentine foot, but again in the round, particularly unusual. How old is it in your mind?
1790, somewhere thereabouts.
Right, well the shape of it I think makes it a bit earlier than that. This rounded edge to it and the type of handles used are much more typical of the 1740s.
Are they?
So it's quite a bit earlier, a good 50 years earlier than that. But nothing's been changed. These handles, I don't even need to open the drawer to see if the handle's been changed. You can tell by the colour of the handle, the shape, the fact that there's no, the wood is the same colour underneath, it's all even. On this beautiful figured mahogany, it's just quite extraordinary, the fiddling on the mahogany. Quite early for use of mahogany, the very beginning of the mahogany era.
Yes.
Do you use this?
Oh, yes.
You do?
All the time.
Right, let's see if I can open it. This is just extraordinary. I mean, one's used to a secretaire chest. What do you call it, a tall boy or...?
We call it the desk.
The desk, the desk. And this locks... I've never ever seen a locking mechanism like this, and these lovely steel struts here to not only lock it closed, but to lock it open. But just the shape, the details, this little inverted, rounded corner here, canted and inverted, every single detail you could imagine. Just beautifully shaped, I mean, extraordinary. And typical of that 1740s period. Is it a piece you've had in the family for a long time?
No, I've had it for about 20, 25 years.
What, bought in an antique shop or something?
Not in an antique shop, at a country house sale.
Oh, right, right. Oh, it's jolly heavy, isn't it?
Yes.
So it's a piece you bought relatively recently?
Yes.
Do you remember what you paid for it?
I think it was about £500.
And what have you got it insured for today, may I ask?
About 3,500.
Well, if you multiply that by about 3...
Really?
And say, I would say at least £10,000 for insurance.
Would you?
At least. Then you might be about right. And you'll never find another one.
No.
Delft vase of about 1670. Lovingly glued together.
Yes, my children had their cousins to stay, and they all went a bit wild. Ran around the house, and someone fell out. Nobody knew, of course, who broke it. 2 of them were involved, but it took 4 of them to put it together.
Where did the vase come from before that?
I bought that in 1944 in Cardiff auction rooms.
Just because you liked it, or
Oh, yes, yes. It attracted me.
Right, let's have a look at the decoration on it. I mean, here, again, copying Chinese. The whole idea with Delft was to imitate the Chinese porcelain that was coming into Europe, and you've got mock Chinese figures. But what I think is exciting about these little chaps is the cartoon quality in which they're done. Dutch Delft vases made in the 17th century can be beautifully painted with Chinamen. I suppose there's a vase he's holding or a musical instrument. Have you thought about what these chaps are doing, perhaps?
Yes, it could be either.
I mean, here we've got someone definitely proudly holding a vase. Looks like he's a China specialist on the Antiques Roadshow, I think, very much admiring that, but done in a sort of a cartoon way. And it's not really like the Dutch painted it at all. It's much more like, I mean, this chap's straight out of the Beano, isn't he? I mean, he's really an English cartoon character. And I think, therefore, because the way these are done, they're so funny, but this isn't a Dutch one, but it's made by Dutchmen in England. An English version made in London at that time.
Good heavens.
And that makes it so much more exciting to us today, because although probably equal rarity, there's far more collectors and enthusiasts for English ones. All the sort of irregularities of it, and it leans a bit, it's irregularly made, but that really is its charm. So, can you remember those years ago, before it got broken, what it cost you in the auction?
Yes, it's £3.50. Well, £3.10
right,
in those days.
In those days. I mean, it's sort of tragic to think that it has got smashed. It could be made better. It could be repaired now, not by little hands, but by great professional hands who could put these together so you'd hardly know. It would be expensive, but you've got a piece that's worth it, because if it's English, then a perfect one, 10,000, 15,000.
Gee whiz.
Even broken, 2,000 or 3,000.
Wait till I tell the family.
Well, how did you come by the picture anyway?
I was a taxi driver and carried some bags into a house for a lady, and this was in the hall on the floor. I thought it had fallen off the wall, so I asked her if she wanted me to rehang it for her, to which she replied she was throwing it out. And to be honest, I bought it for the frame and gave her £25 for it. When I took it home, I had to convince the wife that I would find a better picture for the frame.
But did you ever go back to her in your research and ask her where she got it?
Apparently her husband, who was deceased at the time, had bought it in Germany in 1932. He was a leather dealer. And apparently, according to her, he'd paid 200 guineas for it in 1932. But she's also passed away since, so we'll perhaps never know any more.
Well, my first impression of this painting, signed Henri Rousseau, Douanier Rousseau, is that it's a fake. The problem with Rousseau is that he's a naive artist. He's a primitive artist.
Yeah.
Therefore, he paints like an amateur. Now, that doesn't mean to say that he didn't produce some really magic paintings. Of course he did. But he started as an amateur and
died as an amateur.
And therefore, he is not a difficult artist to copy, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I know you mean.
To a certain extent. And there's nothing a faker likes more than having something relatively easy to copy, which is worth a great deal of money. But what do you think about this painting?
According to the expert who saw it for me, and the tests we had done, in his opinion, it's a real one.
And which expert was that?
Henry Sertinier of Paris.
Paris, right. And tell me about the tests you had done.
X-ray, ultraviolet scan. It sat for about 4 hours under a microscope while the lady who was doing the testing removed some of the varnish and then took the first set of 3 sets of paint samples, which we had sent away. In fact, I ended up going to Paris 3 times.
And what were the results of these tests?
Basically, the expert said that they actually know all the paints he used. Apparently, he actually died owing his paint supplier 60 francs or something. So they've got all the bills and they know the colours he used, and the paint samples match the colours. And in his opinion, it's right.
And I suppose this has been quite an expensive exercise for you.
Approximately £2,500 to £3,000. At the time, which was 5 years ago, they were, Rousseau's were fetching probably £200,000 or £300,000. So in that context, £2,500, £3,000 was a reasonable bet. Plus the fact I've been told 3 or 4 times that it was an old copy. And I don't know, perhaps on the sort that I just want to know for definite.
So the problem is that from our point of view, there are thousands of Rousseaus that are not Rousseaus, right? And many of these Rousseaus were produced in his lifetime with exactly the same sort of paints and materials that he bought himself, because those were the paints available at the time. So that when authenticating a picture, you have to have, most especially in this case, you have to have provenance. You have to know where it came from and be able to trace it back to the artist. And the great problem you are always going to face with this picture is that you haven't got any provenance. And the cards are stacked against you because of all the other fakes.
Yeah. I bought it for the frame. At the end of the day, I could always put another painting in.
This must be one of the largest French porcelain ormolu mantel clocks that I've ever seen. Do you have it working at the moment?
No, because the pendulum has come off the pin, and without the pendulum working, of course, the clock don't
Well,
work.
that makes sense, but that's a very easy repair, as I'm sure you know.
Yes.
The quality is wonderful. Starting at the bottom, we've got these magnificent figures, obviously angels, stylized, and then running up, just looking at the ormolu case now, these columns with Corinthian capitals. And then all around here we have the most superb masks of various beasts. And then running up above the dial area, we've got another selection of small putty, and on top of this dome, a little cherub on its own. But the thing that is amazing quality are these porcelain plaques. What I'm going to do is just to show you inside the clock, see whether we can see a particular mark. And in fact, yeah, underneath the movement, the initials AR, which suggests to me that these plaques were made in Arras, which is about 80, 90 miles north of Paris. They are not Sèvres, as many people would have thought. Each of those plaques is individually numbered, 4411, and has the name Bourdin on the plaques.
Right.
So, do you know what these plaques actually represent, these four?
No, I don't.
Well, they are the continents. This is how the Europeans perceived the Americas in the mid-19th century. This figure here would originally have been wearing a skirt of tobacco leaves, but now we associate them with feathers. And then round here we've got Asia, very much sort of Turkish garb. And then coming round to the other side, Europe, who is portrayed as being rather more sophisticated with all these art trophies down below her feet. And here, Africa. All of the most sensational quality, as I say, and the gilding around the outside of this turquoise ground is lovely.
Lovely.
I think it's almost certainly from a model made for the Great Exhibition of 1851. It's an important clock. So, had you had it in the family a long time or not?
Yes, quite a long time.
Roughly how long?
Late 40s.
Right. Who bought it? Or
my father bought it in Edinburgh,
really?
in Scotland.
And roughly what did he pay? Do you remember? Or
£75.
£75 then. Well, retail price for something like this is going to be in the region of £15,000. So that is actually not a bad return on £75 from the late 40s.
No, quite.
And you must treasure it and get the pendulum sorted because it's so nice to have it working.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, our warm thanks to the people of Penarth. One of the things we've learnt yet again today is the importance of that word provenance. You know, a picture or indeed any other work of art may look right. It may indeed be of the right period, but if you don't know its full history, if you don't know where it's been, then inevitably a question mark may hang over it. And that was certainly the case with that picture that the owner hoped was by Rousseau. So one or two disappointments perhaps, but many happy faces as we leave Penarth now en route for North Yorkshire. So until next week at the same time, from all of us here in South Wales, goodbye.